Pet Sounds, as I'm sure you're aware, is often considered to be one of, if not the best albums of all time. And right in the middle of the track listing is a song that is equally considered to be one of, if not the best pop songs of all time, God Only Knows. I would definitely argue that that is one of Brian's masterpieces. But for this video, I think that there's another song off another album that definitely doesn't get the credit it deserves. And of course, I'm talking about the album Surf's Up. Now, to talk about this song, it's important to get into the right context. The final three tracks on the album are often considered to be a descent into the mind of Brian Wilson, and I can think of no better place to start than the first of those tracks, A Day in the Life of a Tree. Now, if you've ever seen the fantastic biopic of Brian Wilson's life, Love and Mercy, you'll know that the movie essentially claims that the fundamental cause of Brian's downward spiral was his inability to complete the album Smile. And of course, Smiley Smile was the released, unfinished remnants of the album that was supposed to be his magnum opus, Smile. Okay, time for some context you may very well already know. Smile and Smiley Smile are two completely different records. After releasing Pet Sounds in May of 1966, Brian and company started compiling new songs for the album that would be known as Smile. Good Vibrations was released in October of '66, which set the tone for the aforementioned release. Brian said the album would be a teenage symphony to God, and several well-known Beach Boys tracks were written during this period, primarily through Brian's collaboration with Van Dyke Parks, tracks such as Heroes and Villains, Cabanescence, and Surf's Up. During the creation process, several factors became obstacles preventing the completion of the record, such as Brian's increased mental instability and legal trouble with their record label, Capitol. Needless to say, Smile was scrapped and Smiley Smile took its place. Now, Smiley Smile featured some of the tracks intended for Smile, but not all of them, and the ones that did overlap were allegedly changed quite substantially from their original intentions. The quality difference between Smile and Smiley Smile is one often mentioned when talking about the Beach Boys, as many fans, and even Brian himself, believe that Smile was to not only be far superior to Smiley Smile, but that Smile was to eclipse Pet Sounds.
Well, Pet Sounds, everybody liked, of course. People love Pet Sounds. But if you want to put it on a scale of 1 to 10, I'd give Pet Sounds a 4 and Smile a 10. That's how much I'd rate it.
Others, like Bruce Johnston, claim Smiley Smile was far superior to Smile, saying that it was 1,000 times better than Smile, and that Smile was overindulgent. Brian eventually recorded a rendition of the completed Smile record in 2004, and there was a Smile Sessions box set released back in 2011.
Hi everybody, this is Brian Wilson. Look what I got here, the Beach Boys box set. How about that? Look at it, and I think it lights up. Yeah, it lights up. See, it lights up real beautifully.
But as the original concept was never completed as intended, the world may never know what Smile was intended to be. And while that certainly played a role in the big sleep, as I'll call it, a period where Brian spent 3 years in bed, Smiley Smile was in 1967, and the big sleep didn't start until 1973, 6 years later. During this period, Brian had varying levels of participation in the studio. Some albums he was almost wholly absent, and some, like Friends, he was incredibly present, so much so that he considers that to be his second solo album after Pet Sounds. But that all brings us to the Sunflower Sessions of 1969. Sunflower was the album that directly preceded Surf's Up, and during this time, Brian was very present in the studio. In August of 1969, however, things started to get quite a bit worse for Brian as the company that held the rights to the Beach Boys catalog was sold to Irving Almo Music, something very much against Brian's desire. And on top of that, Sunflower, once finished, became the lowest charting Beach Boys album to date in the United States. Yeah, even Stars and Stripes Volume 1 beat it on the charts. Okay, needless to say, this caused Brian to become increasingly reclusive, and during the Surf's Up sessions, Brian was quite absent. So, A Day in the Life of a Tree. This was a song that Brian co-wrote with their manager at the time, Jack Riley. Jack was a songwriter as well as their manager, and he even provided lead vocals to the song. Musically, the song is quite sparse, with the vast majority of the song having only real input from chords from a pipe organ, creating a very mysterious and sort of miserable atmosphere. Lyrically, the track is less of a day in the life of a tree and more of the end of the life of a tree. Brian's lyrics lamenting, "Trees like me weren't meant to live if all this world can give, pollution and slow death." Taken literally, this is a very environmentalist track, something definitely not out of place on the album, along with the opening track, Don't Go Near the Water. But I think it's even more interesting considering Brian's comparison to his own life, something that he has been known to do in songs, of course. After the loss of Smile and the commercial catastrophe of Sunflower, it's very reasonable to expect that Brian saw his work as something unappreciated by the world and even some of his closest relations. Brian's work used to be appreciated. For years my limbs stretched to the sky as a nest for birds to sit and sing. But now he's sort of slipping away. But now my branches suffer and my leaves don't offer poetry to men of song. Admittedly, this is one of my least listened to tracks off the whole album, as I'm never really in the mood to throw it on as an individual track. It's being that it's so sparse, both lyrically and musically, but it is a fundamentally important song for the progression of the album, and it sets up the next track absolutely perfectly. Till I Die. Something that I neglected to mention about the Sunflower sessions was that Brian was actually depressed, I will say, for YouTube's sake, during this period of his life. He did just about every drug he could find, wished to drive his car off a cliff, and asked his gardener to dig his grave in the backyard. The track Till I Die is one of the only Beach Boys songs solely credited to Brian. Musically, the track is much more intense than A Day in the Life of a Tree, and it's much more musical in the vocal delivery as well. Brian proclaiming, "I'm a cork on the ocean, floating over the raging sea. How deep is the ocean? I lost my way." I don't think that there's much need to delve deep into the lyrics here. Brian is merely furthering his thesis from the previous song, questioning his existence and importance to the world. And that thesis leads us to the conclusion. But a very convoluted conclusion, and my personal favorite song of all time, Surf's Up. If you were to walk up to random people and ask them what they think the song Surf's Up by the Beach Boys sounds like, they would probably give you something along the lines of their earlier surf rock, because, what else would you expect? But that couldn't be further from the truth here. Surf's Up is a dark, it's a gloomy, it's a prophetic, but hypnotic, masterful track. And it's so, just starting with the title. Surf's Up as a phrase typically means something like it's time to do something. The surf's up, therefore it's time to go surfing. But here, the word up takes a very different meaning. It's more like the phrase, the jig is up, meaning something's over, you've lost. Surf's up. The Beach Boys aren't what they were before. It's so subversive, but just perfect in the context of everything. The track itself is divided into 3 sections, very distinct from one another musically, going from dense orchestral arrangements to sparse piano-driven madness, concluding with a spiral of vocal harmony that is it's absolutely hypnotic. And when taken literally, which is something very difficult to do for this song, the lyrics speak of a man's religious awakening at a concert hall who turns himself back to God. But there are so many other ways to interpret it, and I think that even individual lines of this track, just as an example, the line, "The Pit and the Pendulum Drawn." The Pit and the Pendulum is a story by Edgar Allan Poe, which works as an analysis of the effect of the fear of death and torture on a person. So what does that mean in the context of this song? Well, is the narrator becoming overburdened with the falseness of the opera? In other words, Brian's disconnect with the falseness of the Beach Boys' surfer persona? Or is the narrator yearning for a less torturous form of punishment than the decimation of his world? I guess this could relate to Brian's search for a better fate than fading into obscurity as characterized by the previous 2 songs. The song also has a lot of references to sleep or awakeness, something clearly represented in the literal analysis of the man taking faith in God, but The Pit and the Pendulum also has a lot of references to sleep, and sleep is a fundamental plot element to the story as well. And I suppose that may tie back to Brian's change in songwriting as well. All of that it's just fascinating to me, but it becomes so much more convoluted when you remember that this was written for the Smile sessions in 1967. Whoa. Okay, so the initial intended position of the track on Smile is fairly disputed. Some, such as Brian's former personal assistant Michael Voss, claim that the song was meant to close the album. However, on Brian's 2004 solo album Smile, the track is featured right about the middle of the album, concluding part 2 of the record. But regardless of the position in the album, the song could easily be written off as Brian's acknowledgement of the Beach Boys' change away from their initial surf persona. But the inclusion of the track on Surf's Up the Record is so remarkable because of how it changes its meaning. The Beach Boys had heavily diversified their sound already by 1971, going head on into R&B for Wild Honey and pretty much abandoning their surf persona at this point. But because of that, Surf's Up it still remains a mystery to me. We know that Brian didn't participate as heavily in the making of this record as he did on other records, so that leads me to assume that he might not have been the one to formulate the track listing. So could that mean that it's maybe a hope that Brian would come out of his depressed state from the other band members? I mean, regardless of that, this song is so interesting to me. Musically, it's like extremely diverse. The melodies are catchy and extremely varied, with lyrics that may never be deciphered, at least by me. So, what do you think about the track, or even the album? Do you have any theories on what it could mean? Because I'd love to read them in the comments. Maybe I'm crazy for looking this far into it. After all, Van Dyke Parks has been known to be sort of a goofster, shall we say, when it comes to writing purposefully enigmatic songs with no real purpose at all. But as it stands, I think this is one of the most interesting and appealing songs of all time, and hopefully I've convinced you to either give it a listen for the first time or revisit it. I know that the Beach Boys are a very mischaracterized group, sometimes at the fault of their own, but I think I'm seeing a reevaluation of their work from a commercial stance that hopefully continues, because I truly think that they are one of the best bands of all time. This was sort of an experiment for the channel, and I hope you enjoyed it. What do you want to see in the future from this channel? Do you want more essay-style videos such as this? Maybe deep dives into artists' catalog? Let me know, because I could pretty much do whatever you guys want me to do. And thank you for watching. I hope you found it useful.